He was knocking on the door, shooting at people, and then leaving the scene immediately.
I need help now. What's wrong?
Police are warning residents to keep their doors locked.
Very scary, thinking that the guy is still out there.
And I'm going, oh no, oh no.
I couldn't understand who could do this to him.
We were concerned that another homicide was going to take place before we could find him.
My wife has been murdered.
If it's really just a random attack, that means that you could be next.
December 5th, 2003. Chris Dunning is meeting with his parents for lunch, but his mom, Nancy, is a no-show.
Hey, Mom. Dad and I are waiting. It's almost 1. If you could just give me a call back.
This was very odd behavior. Nancy was a very dependable person. And so the son and the husband were very concerned to the extent that they went to the house.
Well, their car's here at least. Mom?
911. I need help now. What's wrong?
The anguish is unmistakable. He began shouting to the 911 operator, and during that phone call, the father, Jim Dunning, also got on the phone.
What's wrong? My wife has been murdered.
They both were basically imploring medics and police to get there as quickly as possible.
Mrs. Dunning was found in the foyer, the entryway to her home.
Looks like she let her attacker in.
She had been shot 3 times by a small caliber round.
Looks like 22s. Bag those up and get those over to the lab.
We're going to look to see if there was any other criminal activity that occurred, whether it was a robbery, whether it was a burglary that was interrupted.
But there's nothing disturbed in the home, nothing stolen. Her body was not moved or changed. Pockets weren't rifled through. The evidence would support the inference that she answered the knock at the front door, opened the door, and almost immediately was shot. So really no warning. Pre-planned, cold-blooded assassination.
Nancy Dunning is a well-known real estate agent in Alexandria, especially in her Del Rey neighborhood. But her husband, Jim Dunning, is even more high profile.
Nancy, first and foremost, was married to Jim Dunning, who was our sheriff for 20 years, proud parents of 2 children.
We were close political friends and close personal friends. She was an incredibly thoughtful person. You never knew when Nancy was going to show up on your doorstep with a cake or cookies or something, and she was a connector.
She had a way about her. As a realtor, she was really a big part of marketing Del Rey and making people think about it a certain way.
Nancy was involved in building community. She was heavily involved in the Del Rey Civic Association and with the Business Association on Mount Vernon Avenue, just involved in getting positive things done for the community. She was a high-energy person and a totally can-do person, and when there was something that needed to be done, she got it done, and people loved her. Crime has never been a huge problem. We do have our share of crime, but it's mostly low level. Murders are rare, robberies are rare, rape is rare, car theft and petty stuff, yes, it happens. But by and large, it's a safe city, and we've really been blessed with very little crime. And part of that is due to the police department and to the department's ability and willingness to get out into the community and be a part of the community.
The neighborhood Del Rey actually was kind of not the safest neighborhood before Nancy Dunning helped to transform it into what it is now.
It was really surreal because everybody loved Nancy, and you just couldn't imagine anybody that would want to hurt Nancy.
Everyone in Alexandria feels safe in their own home. They walk in their neighborhoods in the evening and in the morning. Homicide doesn't happen with any regularity in this community.
The murder of Mrs. Dunning shocked the community, and even for law enforcement, it was a significant event.
Well, did Nancy ever mention having any trouble with anyone?
No.
Nancy was somebody who had absolutely no enemies, just living the American dream, if you will. Raised 2 kids in a beautiful home, in a beautiful neighborhood, in a low-crime city.
You know, I gotta ask, any trouble with you and Nancy?
No, absolutely not. We were good.
With not much else to go on, investigators play a hunch.
Being a sheriff is a great way to make enemies. If you run a jail where you've got lots of violent criminals coming in and out all the time, many of them are not going to like you for all kinds of reasons.
So one of the aspects of this investigation we looked at is any threats to the family, whether it was Mrs. Dunning or Sheriff Dunning.
Anybody ever threaten you?
Well, there was this time once.
We found in looking at Sheriff Dunning's work history is that he had received a threatening letter from a former inmate.
Okay, we're gonna need to get that letter.
The FBI has it. I gave it to them a while ago to check up on it.
Guy's name is Chris Hickey.
He didn't like how the sheriff's deputies had treated him and wrote several very threatening letters to the sheriff, some of which were explicit in their threats of violence.
He's got a long record. Assault, weapons charges. We talked to him when he wrote the letter.
And
he told me to go to hell.
We take all threats seriously. We were looking for any leads that were going to lead us to the identification of this murderer.
I found out where Mr. Hickey is now. Looks like he might have wasted a trip.
Why is that?
He's been in jail for more than a year.
We investigated that and were able to establish that that person was not involved in this crime.
Investigators strike out with the letter. But inmates aren't the only ones who seem out to get Jim Dunning.
Being a sheriff is a great way to make enemies, but being a politician is another great way to make enemies.
And what do you remember about the '96 campaign?
Investigators dig deep into Dunning's 20-year political career, looking for anyone holding a grudge. But then, detectives hear something that focuses the investigation much closer to home.
Everything you tell us will be confidential.
One of the most difficult aspects of an investigation of this type is you're going to look at family members to see if they had any involvement with the homicide.
Thank you for the insight.
When Nancy was killed, people were just in shock. People just couldn't believe it. And as is normal, everybody tries to figure out who done it. I mean, it's what everybody wants to know.
Detectives take a closer look at the Dunnings' marriage.
Jim and Nancy had not had a perfect marriage. It was not unreasonable for people to wonder whether it was Jim.
Jim Dunning told detectives that he and Nancy had a happy, trouble-free marriage. But now, investigators discovered that might not be true.
There was a fair amount of talk and gossip and speculation that Jim Dunning might have had something to do with the death of Nancy Dunning.
Jim, you of all people know that we take these rumors seriously.
Regardless of where the leads take us, our detectives are going to act with professionalism and just determine the facts.
Where were you on the day of the murder?
It seemed perfectly obvious that a spouse is always one of the first people that you suspect.
I was with my son. He and I called 911 together, remember?
The uniqueness of the sheriff being the husband of Mrs. Dunning, we obviously had to take the very basic investigative steps and look at the family.
We need to know if there's any truth to this gossip. Were you two having any trouble in your marriage?
You really think I killed my wife? I'll help any way I can. Just don't let your suspicions of me get in the way of finding Nancy's killer.
Police have their doubts, but not much more. They have to let Jim Dunning go.
Jim Dunning became so reclusive after the murder and would not show up at City Hall. He was just total MIA, and this actually added to the speculation.
Police in Alexandria, Virginia, are searching for suspects in the murder of Nancy Dunning, a real estate agent and mother of two.
56-year-old Nancy Dunning, a respected real estate agent and community activist, somehow lost her life inside the residence she shared for so many years with her husband, Alexandria's longtime sheriff, James Dunning.
The high-profile murder has rocked this suburban Washington, D.C. town.
We have no noise, much less crime.
No.
And for something like this to happen suspicious was very, very alarming.
It might look sort of pleasant, almost like a Norman Rockwell painting on the outside, but what was really going on behind closed doors?
And now, Alexandria police have a second killing on their hands. Less than 2 miles from where Nancy Dunning was gunned down in her home. The victim is Ron Kirby.
Mr. Kirby's homicide occurred in the front room of his home. It appeared he was assaulted at the door and reshot multiple times.
Remind you of anything?
Just like in the Dunning investigation, we had a crime scene that could have been the result of a robbery, a burglary interrupted. The other indication of a possible similarity is that the Kirby murder also occurred during the daytime hours.
The neighbors hear anything?
No. Everybody's at work at this time of day.
The aspect to the Kirby investigation that's piqued our interest was the proximity to the Dunning investigation and the fact that he was assaulted and murdered just inside the front door of his home.
And just like in the Dunning murder, there is no evidence that anything was taken from the home. Investigators send Ron Kirby's body to the morgue and then break the horrifying news to his family.
I got a call. I was in utter shock. I couldn't even begin to imagine this was really happening, so I was in shock for a few seconds, I guess, and then all of a sudden I had a complete meltdown.
Ron was a gentle man. He was quiet, soft-spoken, very, very, very smart, full of fun.
Ron Kirby was a jolly person. Every time you walked in the room, he had a big smile on his face and a twinkle in his eye, and he'd give you a giant hug, and he'd ask you how you are, and he was genuinely interested.
My dad was just a really wonderful individual. He was very kind and caring, very supportive.
And he could talk to you forever about yourself. And he was a great family guy. He's so dedicated to his
Deserves something like what happened.
I couldn't understand what went wrong. Who could do this to him?
I know this is the worst time, but every minute counts.
They just asked a lot of different questions. Do you know who would want to hurt your dad?
He was a city planner. He'd been there for 20 years.
Mr. Kirby was a member of the Council of Governments. He was very well known in his community, and the homicide of Mr. Kirby was another homicide that just shook the community because of how well known he was around the region.
Much like Nancy Dunning, this is a man that had no enemies.
Okay, well, if you can think of anyone, you give me a call. Anytime, day or night.
Investigators have no witnesses, no motive, and no leads in the Ron Kirby case. But in the search for Nancy Dunning's killer, police do have something to go on. When they track her credit card, they find a clearly defined electronic trail.
We followed Mrs. Dunning's footsteps prior to the homicide.
The day she was murdered, Nancy Dunning had been shopping.
Hey, take a look at this.
She went in to buy some gifts because it was the Christmas season.
Credit card purchase puts her here around 10.
Stop. That's her, right?
So the images are not high quality, but you can definitely see in the video, you can see her in the store, walking around the store.
Yeah, that's her. Keep going.
About 40 to 45 minutes after she's in the store, a man walks in the front door, and just by coincidence, you can see Nancy kind of walking towards the front door as he walks in, and she takes a right, then he engages in what, in my opinion, is very suspicious behavior. He drops to a knee, seems to be pretending to tie his shoe, acts as though he's speaking on his cell phone, and then he gets up and starts walking towards her.
Fast forward again.
He is a younger white male, maybe in his 30s, got a black leather jacket on, short cropped hair, no facial hair.
There. On the way out.
As soon as she starts to leave, this same man follows immediately behind her. He's purchased nothing. He's got nothing in his hands. He hasn't stopped to do anything basically throughout his time in the store. He's just kind of followed her around.
That's what we call in my business a clue, and it was a really good one.
I want you to take a look at the man in this picture. This guy followed Nancy around the store and then into the parking lot.
I think a reasonable inference is that he followed her from her home that morning. She had a sheriff's license plate on her car and a sheriff's bumper sticker on her car, so he could easily have used those two items to kind of follow her.
It was almost like he knew that she was going to be there.
Detectives know that Jim Dunning did not kill his wife himself, since he was at the restaurant with his son when Nancy was gunned down. But could he be involved?
It was premeditated, cold-blooded murder. Basically an assassination. So then you start thinking about, well, who could possibly commit such an act? A reasonable inference from that might be a professional hitman.
Who would have hired a hitman? And some people theorized Sheriff Dunning might have hired a hitman.
It's hard to say who this is exactly, but it doesn't look like anybody I know.
It turns out that this is the killer, and you do know him. That's gonna look very bad.
But if Ron Kirby's murder is related to Nancy Dunning's, the theory that Jim Dunning hired a hitman is looking more and more unlikely. For now, identifying the man in the surveillance video could be the key to solving both murders.
So that video was actually released publicly by the police.
The Alexandria police were interested in finding out who this person was and interviewing this person.
Police get the man's picture out to the media, hoping someone can identify him. Meanwhile, investigators in the Kirby case get the ballistics report back.
Examining the bullets, I found them to be 22 long rifle caliber bullets.
22 caliber bullets, exactly what the killer used in the Dunning murder. The same ammunition used in both killings. And there's something very odd about these particular bullets.
In 34 years in the laboratory system, I had not seen this type of ammunition before.
Both murders committed with the same rare ammunition. Did one killer shoot Nancy Dunning and Ron Kirby? In Alexandria, Virginia, first Nancy Dunning was shot and killed, and then Ron Kirby was gunned down.
Mr. Kirby's homicide occurred in the front room of his home. It appeared he was assaulted at the door and shot multiple times.
It's a slower bullet and therefore a little quieter. It's not commonly used because most people aren't interested in having a slower bullet with less velocity, less power.
The same bullets and the same gun.
In the 3 bullets that I received in the Nancy Dunning case, I could associate positively bullets together as having been fired from the same firearm.
A lot of people in the community started to connect the two investigations. This caused quite a bit of concern within the community and a lot of discussion.
Detectives hit every gun store and pawn shop in the area.
I'm Detective Huckler. I'm looking for a 22.
They're searching for a lead on who might be buying or selling this rare ammo.
They had a key piece of forensic detail, which was this very distinctive kind of ammunition.
And the reason a would-be assassin would want to use this type of ammunition and gun, obviously the gun's very small, can easily be concealed in a hand.
Nope, nothing. Okay, let me know if someone tried to sell you one, okay? Sure will. Thank you.
Police keep searching for any other links between the two murders.
Our detectives sat down and started to do a side-by-side comparison of the Dunning investigation and the Kirby investigation. They were looking for any similar associates, trying to determine any relationship to these two homicides that would provide further leads.
Business connections were looked at, family members were looked at, friends were looked at.
Well, they knew a lot of people in town, but different people.
What was unique is most homicides occur between people that know each other or through some type of association. We were unable to determine any associations or anyone known to Mrs. Dunning or Mr. Kirby.
And if one killer murdered both Nancy and Ron, as the ballistics suggest, then it's almost certainly not Jim Dunning. Sheriff Dunning doesn't own a .22, at least not one that's registered or issued to him. And he has no connection to Ron Kirby. It looks like their best suspect in the first murder, Jim Dunning, is officially in the clear. And the surveillance video showing a man following Nancy Dunning through the store continues to be plastered all over the news.
The police sent that image far and wide to see if they could get tipsters and people calling them, and they did.
The media attention focused on the Kirby and Dunning murders leads to new tips. And one tipster even gives police a name. The caller says a violent ex-con named Ronald Smallwood might be the killer.
His name had come in just through one of 1,500 tips.
Smallwood, if you're down there, you need to come up.
Unit 223, can you start me some backup at my location?
Let me see your hand.
Your name came up in a murder case. Happened this week.
I don't see how my name came up in that. I was locked up in a jail last week.
Check that out.
223, can you give me a 29 check on a Ronald Smallwood?
If you ain't got nothing to hide, why are you hiding from the officer?
Habit.
Booked in November 5th.
Let him go.
He was quickly cleared, and we basically were stuck with nothing. No potential suspects in the case. Really a dead end at that point, and very frustrating for both the police and my office.
What's going on there,
The
sir?
caregiver next door just ran over and told me that there's an intruder in the house.
And again, shot in her home at the very front door.
Okay, and what's the address there?
2419 Ridge Road Drive.
I heard the address. Wasn't sure about their house number. I knew the street. And I'm going, oh no. Oh no.
She said someone came into the home. Are they still in the home?
Once inside, the intruder starts shooting.
right there at the front door, just the same way that Nancy Dunning had been murdered, just the same way that Ron Kirby had been murdered.
Nancy was unsettling, Kirby thing was unsettling. And then all of a sudden, in another quiet residential neighborhood, shooting. Seems like the work of somebody who was just trying to create chaos and fear.
Police in Alexandria, Virginia, have another shooting on their hands. A shooting that looks a lot like the attacks on Nancy Dunning and Ron Kirby.
Miss Lodato, stay with me, okay?
The third victim is 59-year-old Ruth Ann Lodato.
They bring Ruth Ann out on a stretcher, and I just went, oh my God.
Mrs. Lodato was a very well-known member of this community, been here for a very long time.
We knew the Lodatos very well. She was the music teacher for my 3 daughters. Ruth Ann Lodato was one of the sweetest people in the world. She loved music, she loved piano, she loved teaching kids. She had taught for many, many years.
Guy knocks on the door, Ruth Ann answers.
Mrs. Lodato was being attacked in the front door of her home. She was shot several times and retreated back into the living room.
She makes it to here. He shoots her 3 times.
We also found 5 bullets, all were .22 caliber.
Ruth Ann's mother was also in the house, as was her mother's caretaker.
Jeanette, who was helping Ruth Ann's elderly mother, walked into the front of the home, confronted the shooter unintentionally. He then shot her. She fell to the ground. She was shot in the left arm. In this case, the shooter made a very, very serious mistake, and that is he thought Ruth Ann was home alone. She wasn't.
For the first time, we had a witness.
He was tall. He had on a jean jacket. He was maybe 50 or so, and his hair was kind of crazy.
She described him as a thin white male, balding with messy hair and a long gray beard.
And his eyes, they were black.
She fixated on his eyes, and she described them as really scary, intense eyes that she remembered very clearly.
Get this description down to Central Dispatch. I want this in every patrol car. Up. Thanks.
Alexandria police flood the neighborhood with officers, looking to trap the killer before he slips away again.
We increased our patrols. We did road stops where we handed out flyers with the description of the suspect.
But the dragnet fails, and word comes from the hospital that 59-year-old mother of 3, Ruth Ann Lodato, did not survive the attack.
There's no reason in the world why anybody would do this to her. You know, you just had that sunken feeling, oh my God. I just knew it was a serial killer on the loose.
Police will now look at 3 unsolved murders together.
I'm a little bit on edge.
Tonight, the community is coming to grips with the possibility a serial killer may be on the loose.
When someone is murdered in their home, it does kind of shock the conscience of the community.
There was a panic in Alexandria about, you know, what are we going to do? Is this a safe community? How are we going to keep ourselves safe?
Police are warning residents to keep their doors locked and not open them to strangers.
What's really going on and who's next, or what could be next, or why can't we figure this out?
Such a wonderful neighborhood, and it's really unnerving to not be trusting anymore.
We are on the cusp of a community in great fear.
Working with the witness to Ruth Ann Lodato's murder, investigators get a better picture of the man they're after.
Police were able to create a composite sketch, and that was released pretty quickly to the public.
Started working the details and looking at the possibilities of a relationship between the various cases.
The Lodato homicide was similar to the Dunning and Kirby homicides in the fact that she was assaulted and shot as she was at the entrance to her home.
It's the same general neighborhood. If you put the 3 murders on a map, they form a triangle about a mile across. It was a weekday. It was during the late morning. Got the knock at the door. You have somebody being shot immediately, and you have no obvious motive, no robbery, no burglary. The Lodato family is well known in Alexandria. Her brother was a judge. Her father was a judge.
All three were respected, admired people in the community. They had something to do with government.
Another connection is the .22 caliber slugs found at all three crime scenes.
In all three homicides, I had similar ammunition that I'd not seen in any other case in the laboratory in 34 years.
Desperate for any kind of lead, police collect video from surveillance cameras in Alexandria.
We completed approximately a mile-wide canvass of all homes.
There is a deranged individual somewhere, and we'll all work together to find that person.
Meanwhile, the sketch of the alleged shooter is all over the news.
The department received an immense number of tips in terms of leads and things to follow up on.
One of those tips leads police to a man named Charles Severance.
He was someone who generally matched the description of the composite sketch and may have been somebody of interest to us. He was living with a girlfriend at the time out in Ashburn, Virginia, which is about 40 miles west of Alexandria.
Mr. Severs, Sheriff's Office.
So the officer knocked on the door, no answer. He left a business card that said, I need to speak with Charles Severance. It did not say why he wanted to speak with him. It just said, I need to speak with Charles Severance. So there was really nothing compelling about the tip. And the service officer was merely doing due diligence.
As investigators follow up on every tip, they also pore over all the video they've collected.
One of the pieces of evidence that we were able to collect was a video approximately a half mile from the Lodato residence.
A citizen just had set up some surveillance cameras outside of his home because his car was being broken into. He came forward and said, hey, look, I've got some video from the time of the murder. I don't know if it's useful or not, but I'm happy to share it with you guys.
That's when police spot a car.
It was traveling faster than the other vehicles in the video. The vehicle of interest in the video was a Ford Escort station wagon.
I got something on that red car in the videotape. It belongs to Charles Severance.
Just a game changer, a huge game changer.
Police start a new search for a man named Charles Severance, who they believe could be responsible for 3 cold-blooded murders.
Once we identified Charles Severance as our suspect, we did everything we could to locate him as quickly as we could, because obviously we were concerned that another homicide was going to take place before we could find him.
But before they get very far, they receive a strange call from the Russian embassy in Washington, D.C.
Charles Severance went to Washington, D.C. and tried to seek asylum at the Russian embassy. And at that time, he was telling them that he was being persecuted by the city of Alexandria.
I think he fancied himself a latter-day Edward Snowden and thought that the Russians would just give him asylum and he could fly away and be perfectly fine and never face any responsibility for his crimes.
Russian embassy officials turn Severance away, but they are suspicious enough to alert police in Alexandria.
They passed that information along to us, and it was at that point we believed that we had our suspect.
Alexandria police head straight back to Severance's girlfriend's house, hoping to catch him there.
Alexandria police! Come to the door!
God. Can you please step outside, ma'am?
Yeah. Let's go.
Oh my God. Can you read and sign this, please, ma'am?
After we identified Charles Severance as a suspect, we executed a search warrant at his girlfriend's residence. We learned through his girlfriend that he had packed up and said that he was going to go camping.
Well, where is he?
West Virginia, where he always goes. Could you please tell me what he's done?
He's wanted for murder.
Detective!
Excuse me.
Look what I found in the basement.
22s.
We were able to discover that he had purchased 2 .22 caliber weapons and also found 2 spent casings that were Remington .22 caliber subsonic ammunition.
The same rare ammunition used in all 3 of the Alexandria murders. They find bullets, but no guns.
In her mind, since only her and Severance knew about the guns, the only plausible explanation for their absence was that he had taken them with him when he left.
An armed Charles Severance has slipped away. But when investigators put a trace on his credit cards, phone, and bank account, they get a hit.
He was located in Wheeling, West Virginia. He didn't have much money, but he bought a room in a very cheap hotel. We were afraid either that he might hurt himself or alternatively want to go out shooting, and he had guns and ammunition with him and obviously was not afraid to use them.
Charles Severance, come to the door!
Charles Severance, come to the door now!
Kick it. Clear. Let me see your hands! Let me see your hands! Put your hands behind your back! Put your hands behind your back now!
Charles Severance, you have a right to remain silent.
Charles Severance, suspected serial killer, is finally under arrest.
Charles Severance was a young man that I knew in the community. He worked in one of my campaigns in the mid-90s. I wasn't close to him, but I remember him generally. He's a nice guy. He's very bright.
This is a very intelligent person, very much like the Unabomber. He had a degree in mechanical engineering. He was well-read.
Charles Severance ran for mayor. He had already clearly shown signs of mental illness before 2000 in public. There was one infamous debate where he grabbed an American flag and ran out of the building and wandered around with it, and as somebody from the debate actually went out to grab the flag and bring it back. He took a swing at a debate organizer when he ran for Congress, and so his 2 campaigns were chaotic.
With Severance in custody, investigators get their hands on something that might explain why he went on this murderous rampage.
He had written his innermost thoughts in a series of composition notebooks. Lots of ruminations about killing people, lots of ruminations about murder.
Hey, check this out.
And the notebooks also explain the twisted motive behind these murders.
Lots of ruminations about the custody dispute that was the, if you will, the spark that lit the kindling and started the fire in this case. He had been involved in a very, very contentious custody dispute over a child that he had fathered with a woman that he had had a brief relationship with. And the judge ended up deciding Mr. Severance should have no contact with his child whatsoever. He was extremely unhappy about that. That really set him on fire, if you will, with regards to anger. And even 15 years later, his writings established conclusively that he was still extremely angry.
Severance blamed Alexandria officials for banning him from seeing his son.
He wanted to kill Nancy Dunning, and he obviously accomplished his goal. The question is why? Why would he focus on the sheriff? First of all, he was hit with protective orders. The people that actually served him with the protective orders were sheriff's deputies. They actually put Dunning's name on the papers. He was thinking, you want to take away one of my family members, Sheriff Dunning? I'm going to take away one of yours. And maybe you'll learn your lesson. Ruth Ann Lodato was both the sister and the daughter of Alexandria judges. And of course, he had a bone to pick with Alexandria court system.
Can I help you?
I think he thought on some level he was getting back at what he called the law enforcement elites that had oppressed him, a proud patriarch, taken away his son.
It's obvious he had a deep-seated anger towards the city of Alexandria and the communities that were impacted by these tragic events. You
can't bring a just result when you have 3 absolutely beautiful human souls killed for nothing more than opening the front door of their homes. There can't be a just result. But in the imperfect world in which we live, I think as much justice as could be brought was brought.
I'm proud of the Alexandria Police Department's response to this particular set of events. And as a result, we have someone who is properly behind bars, and our community is safer.
It wasn't over. You know, you don't feel good, you don't feel happy, you just feel a bit of relief.
I finally breathed. Finally breathed again. I just felt 10,000 pounds lift. I mean, literally, I felt lighter within seconds. Just knowing that he was never going to be walking the streets again.
Once Charles Severance was sentenced, it was a relief, but at the same time, it was still like bittersweet because it doesn't get back my dad or any of the loved ones. It's still always really just frustrating, and it's sad.
I'm not even sure that the trial and conviction of the perpetrator, you know, solves the problem. There's still a big hole left by all 3 of these people.